All right, welcome, Jimmy at the Crossroads again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today here on the program. We will get back to Matoush Magic coming up here in just a little bit at the Crossroads. We're going to update you on what's happening, some changes at the Crossroads. But as we teed up, there have been such significant goings-on in Cuba. The communist country is now facing protests. Thousands protesting in Cuba over the weekend. So much getting under the skin of the rulers there in that communist country that is now speaking out very clearly and passionately and unequivocally for freedom, such that the government, the tyrannical communist government, has shut down the internet for the people in Cuba. You can see some scenes there, that's from the Today Show, of what's been happening in that country, which has cried out for freedom. And today I am so pleased to have the opportunity, and we just put this together here in the last little bit, so we've got our guest on the phone. But whenever we have the chance to not just talk about the fight for freedom in a country like Cuba, but to talk about it with someone who escaped the tyranny of a nation like Cuba and its horrendous communist government, that's an opportunity we want to take to heart and do here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And I am so pleased now to be joined by our very special guest, Mailyn Salabarria. She is from Havana, Cuba, currently lives in northeastern Colorado. She is born in Cuba, made in the USA, a small business owner, something not easily done in a tyrannical communist country like Cuba. And Mailyn joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Mailyn, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Thank you, Jimmy, for the invitation. We really appreciate the opportunity.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
I am so grateful for you taking a little bit of time today, because what has happened over the weekend, I mean, it is remarkable. And I know you have been constantly on the phone. You didn't sleep a wink last night because of what's been happening. What, in your words, has been taking place in Cuba, Mailyn? What's happening there?
Well, this is something, Jimmy, that it's historical. It's something really unprecedented. Nothing like what happened in the last 24 hours on the island has happened in Cuba in the past 62 years. The historical significance of what happened in the last 24 hours it's really unprecedented. Again, this is not a small that has happened sporadically here and there, and that the government has been able to crush in a matter of hours. The closest that I can remember, and I was still back in Cuba back then, in 1994, with the so-called Maleconazo during the Clinton administration. It happened only in Havana when people took up the streets in El Malecon, and Fidel Castro, who was still alive, he took the tanks and the entire army in the streets and obviously crushed the whole thing in a matter of hours. We're talking about something major here. Yesterday in Cuba, there were recorded more than 57 protests on the streets simultaneously at the same time in the entire island. Apparently, it started in a small town in the outskirts of Havana called San Antonio de los Baños, where, by the way, the biggest Air Force base from the Cuban Army is located. And thanks to social media, even though the internet is censored and the access is very limited and it's cost prohibited for most Cubans, that helped to spread the war around the island. It's been significant also in the sense that we're seeing a couple of generations of younger Cubans born and raised under the communist dictatorship that basically have taken a point where they have lost everything. They basically have been telling us online, in their social media posts, in their private text messages, private groups, any communications that we get. They are literally telling us we got nothing else to lose and we're done. We're over. The number of people that took up the streets yesterday, again, it was nothing like this have been seen in Cuba before. And I think a big catalytic or a big thing that played a role in this was, again, the access to internet and social media that they have now, even though it's been censored and it's being restricted by the government. I think that played a key difference in any other attempt of people taking out the streets to protest for liberty in Cuba that has happened before.
That's what we've seen in Iran, and we've seen it in Hong Kong, and then, of course, the government goes after those social media platforms, tries to shut down the internet because they don't want the free spread, not just of ideas, but of plans for peaceful protests to get out there and say to the government, what is going on here is unacceptable. We don't want to tolerate it. We will not tolerate it anymore. And so I want to ask you, Mailyn, in terms of the protests, what are they protesting about? Because in the media, they're talking a lot about COVID-19 and how they're not getting vaccinations and those kinds of things. But then at the same time, you hear cries for freedom, Libertad in the streets. What are they protesting for exactly?
I'm so glad that you addressed the big, huge liar elephant in the room with this. I think that is utterly disgusting, unethical, and absolutely voided of any journalistic integrity. The fact that the media in the United States and in other parts of the world have been manipulating the actual cause or the reason why people took the streets. They have been saying that is because the lack of basic necessities, because people are calling for vaccines, because hospitals are collapsing, which is true. But guess what? That scarcity and everything collapsing in that country, that has been the norm for the past 62 years. So I am sorry to burst the bubble of whoever wants to believe that propaganda otherwise in the United States or any other part of the world, but that's not the reason why Cubans are risking their lives on the streets. They're not, what they're chanting and what they're asking for is for freedom, not vaccines. They are asking for the current unelected president that inherited the island like a plantation owner's son would do, to quit and leave the island to have open elections and to leave the Cuban people to make a decision on how they want to run their country. So yeah, it's shame on them, shame on the headlines, and it's kind of like funny to see that these corporate media organizations all over the world that have been carrying out the water for Castro and for communism in Cuba, obviously from the distance because they don't have to live it or suffer it like we did. It has been so big what happened in the past 24 hours that they haven't had any other choice than to actually cover it. Even the New York Times that have been in bed with Castro since the day one, they were forced to cover the story, even though they manipulated the headline to a point that it was implying that asking or yelling freedom on the street was an anti-government protest. I'm like, duh, of course it is. You're talking about a communist dictatorship. What were you expecting?
I was listening, actually. The clip that we've been playing B-roll for is a Today Show clip where this morning they literally said anti-government protests, and that's pretty clear, and it shouldn't be all that surprising. Now, Mailyn Salabarria is our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. You have a law degree from Havana University in Cuba and an MS in Mass Communication and Journalism from Florida International University. You grew up in Cuba. You got your law degree from Havana University. What were things like a couple decades ago when you fled that country, came to freedom here in the United States? What's your own personal story, and how is that illustrative of what's happening now and where the Cuban people are at from this perspective, that they're finally, so many of them, fed up with it, that they're actually taking to the streets in protest like we haven't seen before?
Well, it's kind of like hard to summarize on a quick story for a few minutes, but yeah, it's basically the same Cuba that I left 20 years ago. The only difference is that back when I was there, we didn't have internet, we didn't have computers, there was no smartphone, there was no social media. And that's, like I was saying before, what become the greatest catalytic right now, because that means that even under the umbrella of the government control of the social media and censorship of the internet, each single Cuban that has a smartphone can potentially be an independent journalist that can report to all over the world what is really going on in there. That is something that definitely I didn't have when I was there. But it's still like we, the ones that were able to leave, we consider ourselves lucky. But it's like you still live like this heartbroken, half divided life, because as long as you have relatives and friends and loved ones behind, you're going to be between a rock and a hard place. Like in my case, for example, we haven't heard from my relative in there since Saturday around noon. We know that the government modus operandi, and this is what we were able to confirm last night, is that as soon as the night fell all over the island, they started taking the special forces out. We full anti-riot gear, super fancy, everything that they need to beat up people on the streets in the middle of the night. Then they cut off the power, so it's dark. They shut off the internet, and then they start dragging people out of their houses once that they were confirmed by snitches or whatever videos or information the state security got in their hands that those people were participating in the protest. So it's a very dangerous time, and that's why our plea, even though we are out of Cuba, we literally have our hands tied, no matter which country we are. Our plea is just for everybody out here to have access to this information. To number one, to look for the real sources of people on the streets reporting from Cuba what's going on, what's really going on, not what the government or the president wants you to believe. And number two is that become some sort of like relay where we are. This is what we have been doing in the past 24 hours. We have been translating and sharing and posting and retweeting and sharing in messages and every single platform that we can get on those reports that are coming from Cuba, because the only way that somebody can really care about what's going on is going to be if we put that information out. And I think that's, going back to your question, is a key difference from where it was when I was there. When I was there, obviously, not having the access to the information made any organization effort to protest or anything like that way harder. It was my time when I was finishing law school in Cuba. It was when the Maleconazo of 1994 took place. I was still there with the rapture crisis during the Clinton administration when they had to set up the refugee camps in Guantanamo Bay. And I was there when the Leon Gonzalez crisis happened. I was there when the Cuban government ordered the massacre of the 13 de Marzo tugboat, where they ordered the sinking of a boat with more than 57 Cubans that were trying to leave the island, and 27 of the people killed by the Cuban government were children, were minors. So, seeing all this from the distance, man, it's a really, really hard thing too, because we are split, we're broken. We want to help. We can't. We feel guilty that we're out, and now they're there on their own. We try to be their voices as much as we can outside, but at the same time, everybody and their mother knows by now that we Cuban Americans, or anybody for that matter in this country that has any libertarian or conservative leaning, is going to be on the radar of the current administration. So it's like I cannot believe that many of the things that I escaped from are becoming realities around me. I left that country 20 years ago looking for a better future for myself and better future for my children. And there are some days that I really cannot believe that the same thing has been happening around me, just at a slower pace in English and with Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's such a profound point. Again, we're talking with Mailyn Salabarria. She is originally from Havana, Cuba. As you say, born in Cuba, made in the USA, a small business owner in the great state of Colorado, where, of course, Jimmy at the Crossroads is coming to you from. And Mailyn, I want to ask you about sort of the build-up to this point in sentiments from average Cubans when you left, and then since you've been in contact leading up to the current protests of the past few days. How have the dynamics been from the people? How much have they tolerated the regime? How much has it been just kind of festering for so many years to the point where now they're willing to spill out in the streets like they never have before, especially with social media tools? Because to me, that's something that must not get set aside in this idea that, oh, it's just suddenly coming up now because of COVID-19. It seems to me that it's something that's been building up for years, really decades.
Exactly, and it's kind of like funny in a sense to say that, oh my God, we have been having these conversations with friends. Like, we cannot believe that the whole coronavirus circus could be the silver lining on removing the lead of what is really happening in Cuba. But yes, it has been literally the cherry on the top. Like you said, since I left, all these have been brewing for many years. And the best way that I have to put it when we talk about this, it's a process very similar to the Velvet Revolution that built up in Eastern Europe before the Berlin Wall fell. I don't know if you all remember those years, but it actually took years of build-up of people's discontent with all the scarcities and the lack of freedom and the repression and the censorship, and then added all those things. Protests started, and they lasted in Eastern Europe and Germany and Yugoslavia for months before actually the Berlin Wall came down. And I think a very similar process is what has been happening in Cuba. Again, we have a new crop of a younger generation that has been born in completely hopelessness. You have Cubans that now have more access to the information, that either to go in and out of the island or through social media or the internet. They are actually able to see how real life and how the real world operates outside Cuba. That didn't exist when I left in 2001.
Right.
And I think that all that has been like a catalyst to accelerate this eye-opening process at society-wide level. And everything that happens with the coronavirus circus has precipitated all that, because you are talking about a healthcare system that, although being free, quote unquote, it has already been collapsing before you get COVID-19 on it. And now in the past week, I just did a show. We did two shows, one in English and one in Spanish, in Miami last week, and we were talking precisely about this. And it's like how the morgues were overflowing with COVID fatalities. The bodies, they didn't have, the resources to put them in the refrigeration areas. The hospitals with people laying in the floor. Like right now, I have a cousin with his brother, and their twin girls are in a hospital in Pinar del Rio because they have COVID, and we don't know anything about there. We have friends in Mexico that are collecting medications with the home care kits that they're doing, the treatments that they're doing in Mexico with the ivermectin and vitamin C and zinc and all that. They have all that put together, and they have no way to send that to Cuba. And then if you do it through the official channels, that's going to end up in the government hands. And then they're going to do what they always do with donations. They sell them on the stores where people have to buy in dollars. And this is just like a quick glance example of how all this has been building up for so long. And people just said, we're done. Now, what's the big concern with this? As I was mentioning before, the way the media has been manipulating the real causes of the uprising, the fallacy of the embargo has been demonstrated in those pictures and those videos like it's nobody's business.
What do you mean by that?
What do I mean by that? What I mean by that, number one, is that the Helms-Burton law was a legally passed piece of legislation approved by the U.S. Congress. So it was initially set up to protect and defend the individual property rights of American citizens and American companies who had their property seized by the Castro government, and the Castro government never paid them off as they were supposed to do for that property. So that's number one. And then over the years, all those restrictions have been loosened so much that nowadays, basically the only thing that is in place is that the Cuban government have to pay in cash when they do transactions with any American company. Data and reports from both governments, the United States and the Cuban government, will show anybody that can do their Google that the United States is on the top 5, if not the number 1, commercial trade partner for Cuba. They receive mostly from the United States medication, medical equipment, farming and agriculture, seeds and supplies, food, and farming and heavy equipment. It's on the top trade partner of the Cuban government nowadays for all those five things is the United States. And on top of that, for 62 years, they have been able to trade with the entire world with other countries to get whatever they need. So no, I will never accept that anybody come and tell me that what is happening in Cuba is the fault of the embargo, because that's not true. That's a huge fallacy. And on top of that, I can use the videos and the photos from the last 24 hours to demonstrate that's a lie. Because if they're so cash-strapped and they're so bad, and it's the fault of the embargo and the United States government, how come they have special forces that are armed to the teeth with all sort of anti-riot 21st century quality gear? Where do they get the money from? I mean, if the embargo is so bad and they're so cash-strapped, how come they have all that?
Well, isn't it
readily available to repress people when they want to take up the streets?
Well, Mailyn,
for freedom.
Isn't it the case when you have these repressive regimes, whether they are communist, Islamist, or what have you, and what they do is, if there are sanctions, if there are embargoes, what they'll do is take it for themselves and then use that to enhance the strength and power of the regime, and their people suffer.
Exactly. And the examples in Cuba, again, everybody nowadays around us have a computer with their smartphone in their hands. The information is there. Anybody can go and get it. There is no way that this fallacy can continue to be perpetrated when it's been demonstrated in the past 24 hours that the government was able to militarize the streets in a matter of hours with, top-of-the-line equipment and supplies and everything like that. So, no, the whole reason why everything is collapsed and why the basic needs of the Cuban people are not being met doesn't have anything to do with the embargo.
Mailyn, I want to jump in real quickly because, excuse me, we're getting a little lower on time, and I'm going to ask you to give final thoughts in just a moment, but I want to get your reaction to something. And that is the absence of comments, certainly strong comments, coming from any socialist members or farther left members of the United States Congress. And I have a quick 20 seconds or so of this clip of Stuart Varney on Fox Business raising this question. I want to play that and then get your reaction and then some final thoughts before we let you go. Take a listen to this.
Where's Bernie Sanders? Where is AOC and the squad? Their fellow socialists in Cuba are in revolt, not against the evils of capitalism, oh no, but the failure of socialism. And what have we got here? Silence from America's left. Over the weekend,
I think that captures it. Mailyn, what do you make of that and the absence of... Yeah, go ahead, please.
I am not surprised, Jimmy. I mean, their silence, as usual, is deafening. I know we only have a few seconds left, but for people like them, I can only tell you that there is no amount of pork clutching on Sunday Mass that is going to save their souls from burning in hell for supporting something that they have never had to live on.
I think that's especially coming from yourself, Mailyn, someone who suffered under the Cuban regime and communist government, as long as you did, able to come to the United States and enjoy the freedoms that we have here, and that honestly, those of us who were born in America, I think, to take for granted all too often. And it is remarkable to hear you say that, and then yet we have these politicians who persist in bringing us in a direction that strengthens government authority and government control over American life, intentionally bringing us in that direction of socialism, Mailyn.
Exactly. So as part of my final call, I think I would like to start with that, is that to my fellow Americans, if the past year and a half in the United States didn't open your eyes, if seeing what is happening in Cuba, what you're hearing from people right there on the streets doesn't open your eyes, if that doesn't make you stop on your tracks and rethink everything that you have known and thought about how much power the government should have in your life, if this is not the turning point for anybody in this country, Jimmy, I honestly don't know. Don't know what it would be. It would be like a herd of sheep being led to the slaughterhouse. And on that line, and going back to what is happening in Cuba, I think it's something very important that everybody has to keep in mind, and
Please.
it's that the president of Cuba yesterday, basically, he called for a civil war on the island. He basically said that the order has been given for Cubans to start killing each other on the street. My fear, and the fear that many of us Cubans out of Cuba have right now that make us feel so powerless, is that a massacre, a genocide is brewing in there. And the international community is basically paying, blind eyes and turning to the other side, because what normally would be international organizations supporting the right of free speech and the freedom of other people, these organizations have been in bed with Castro and the Cuban government for decades now. So we basically got nobody. We have nobody. The Cubans on the island have nothing. We have a militarized police, and nobody has firearms on the island. That's one of the things we were hearing on this phone call over the radio last night. It's like we only have stones and sticks, and we know that many of us are going to die. And again, we got nothing to lose. There is nothing else that we can lose. Many of us are willing to pay that price. Wow. So I think it's very important that this call to have a civil war placed by the Cuban government yesterday be taken very seriously by all governments and any other human being on this earth. And I think that the other important call or plea that we all have is that please, whoever is outside of Cuba and have access to this information, it's not going to cost anything to become the voice of those that are being silenced on the island today. We are not risking the things that they are risking. It's not going to hurt us to get out there and put out the information on what's really happening in Cuba. Again, a massacre is brewing. The Cuban government is going to assassinate people on the streets, and nobody else is paying attention. This is a desperate situation, and I think that even the United States government still doesn't have the slightest idea of the repercussions of what's going on 90 miles from Florida. I'm telling you.
I can hear the anguish in your voice, and rightly so. That's why we wanted to spotlight it today on this program. And I do see that there are others who are trying to shine light on what's happening. Let me just ask you finally, Mailyn, and I so appreciate your time today. We're going a little longer than we anticipated, and I'm grateful for it. To your point that you were just bringing up, what can Americans do, and what should we do? What's your call to the American people right now at this moment of need for the people in your home country of Cuba?
At this point, it's again becoming a relay of the information that is coming from the island, becoming a voice for those that are taking the streets all over Cuba, becoming a voice for them because they're being silenced, they're being killed, they're being repressed, and standing up for what is right. Standing up for giving nobody's asking for an intervention of anything. Yes, there is a humanitarian crisis in the island. Yes, there has to be a way to make the COVID medications, food, and basic necessities, I don't know, even like in a freaking parachute, get it in there, because people need that to survive. But I think that the first and crucial step would be for every average American, whether our government here does it or not, is to acknowledge the plea of the Cuban fighters, the people that are on the streets, and to keep spreading the message of calling for freedom and from the current government to leave and quit.
Yes. So well put. Mailyn Salabarria, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I will say that the silence of the American socialists is deafening right now, and hopefully they will speak out at least for human rights, but I'm not holding my breath on that. However, there are so many Americans I know who have their thoughts, prayers, and support for the people of Cuba right now. I so appreciate you joining us, and we will have you back on this or other programs, and I'm looking forward to further conversations, Mailyn. Thank you so much, and God bless you and the people of Cuba right now in this time of need.
Thank you very much again for the opportunity to let us put the message out and bring awareness to what's really going on the island. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your passion and continuing to speak out for your home country of Cuba. Thank you, and we will talk soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Bye.
Once again, Mailyn Salabarria joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads on the phone. I want to bring on Nathan Matoush because, Nathan, you're newer to politics. In fact, Jimmy at the Crossroads is one of your big introductions to politics and really delving deeper. And you didn't really know too much about what's happened in Cuba. What do you make? What is your reaction to Mailyn's testimony on what's happening in her home country and just the pain and anguish under true communism, a true socialist regime?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'd like to thank Mailyn for coming on and voicing what's going on in Cuba, because I think we need more of that, because I think people need to open their eyes and see what's going on in these other countries. And just as Americans, it's just kind of like we could just appreciate what we have here in America. I mean, what's going on in Cuba is absolutely devastating. I mean, can you imagine just going through something like that? I mean, you're talking about the government completely taking over your lives, and really, the only option you have is to protest and to fight back. And I just, my heart goes out to the people of Cuba. It really does.
Well, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, listening to Mailyn Salabarria. Again, she is from Havana, Cuba, where she has a law degree from Havana University. She lives in northeastern Colorado, has a small business, living that American dream and looking back at her home country and seeing this happen. What is so remarkable and so encouraging, though, is the fact that the people are speaking up. They are speaking out, and they're risking their lives, truly risking their lives for freedom, and yet the American media just says, oh, they're anti-government protesters, COVID-19, it's the pandemic, so on and so forth. Okay, maybe those are some things that can help really bring this out into the open, but this is about freedom. It's about Libertad.
Yeah, it's about freedom, and you said it. I mean, I think the media is going to try to hide this in some way and not not put it like the way we are. Like they're going to hide it and be like, oh, it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal, because this could happen in any country. It could happen here in the United States with what's happening with some of these far left politicians that are getting elected. That promise you the world, but really you look at Cuba, that's kind of what they're aiming for, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. And the Today Show, look, it was fine. It wasn't a horrible report, but it really is missing the mark, especially in underscoring that point that they are clamoring for freedom.
Yeah.
And that is what is happening. And Mailyn just put it so powerfully and so forthrightly that, to deny what's happening in there, or even just to ignore it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can do that.
Yeah, I don't know how you can either. And I mean, this is what the media does continuously every day. And, some people think that, everything is fine, but it's really not. It's really not. And I mean, the fact, Jimmy, that you and I have been doing this show for over a year, we have the right to speak our minds. We have the right of freedom of speech without, getting shot down by the government, without getting censored. I mean, their whole internet is being shut down. Like, They can't even speak their mind. I mean, can you just imagine? My prayers today are all going to go to Cuba. I think after watching what we just did, and to Mailyn and any of her family members that are back in Cuba. But yeah, Jimmy, this is alarming, and I think you and I, as United States citizens, should be aware of this, because something like this could really happen.
It's so close to home too. Cuba is not far off the coast of Florida, the United States.
It's really not. And my heart goes out to all of them. But yeah, Jimmy, we're proud to live here, definitely. And I think we need to be grateful for the freedoms that we have.
I think that's very well put, Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We'll get back to Nathan in just a moment, but I do want to add this. Here in the United States, as Mr. Matoush just said, we take our freedoms for granted all too often. We don't recognize the Libertad that we are able to enjoy here in our country. And then we're reminded when we see what happens in a place like Cuba or Iran or Hong Kong, when the people rise up, sometimes waving American flags. I have an American flag right here. In foreign countries, they're often waving the American flag, singing the national anthem as they did in Hong Kong. And yet here in the United States, we're trying to turn back the clock to give more power, more authority to the government. As I said before, the silence of the socialists is deafening. Where is AOC? Where is Bernie Sanders? Then the list goes on. Crickets. We'll see where this thing goes in terms of the American politicians, but we definitely are seeing the people rise up in Cuba for the better. And we can hope and pray that they will be safe and be able to persist in fighting back against a horrible, tyrannical regime that has been oppressing them, truly oppressing them, for many decades. And now it's boiling over, and the people there definitely need our thoughts, prayers, and support.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah. Boom!